Good morning, potter and artists. Today we're going to paint this beautiful watercolour toucan. I'm going to take you through the whole process step by step, nice and slowly. So if you'd like to see how to paint this fabulous bird and learn how to get lovely black shadows and highlights on the wings with lifting, keep watching. Hi, it's Alison from the Pottery and Artist. In today's tutorial we'll be getting really detailed and down to it with this beautiful toucan. He's such a beautiful bird to paint and gives us lots of possibilities for learning good watercolour techniques. If you'd like to learn how to perceive, plan and proceed like an artist, keep on watching my videos and step by step the mystique will be revealed to you and you'll have a lot of art input, instruction and inspiration for your own art awakening. If you'd like to subscribe, click the little red square in the bottom right hand corner and then you'll be prompted to click a grey bell. Click that as well and also allow YouTube notifications on your mobile phone and you'll get my videos which I upload every Saturday into your inbox. If you need any outlines for this video or any information about materials and techniques, read the text below in the description and you can email me at alisonfennellart@hotmail.com and for a reference photograph if you're not confident to draw. It's hard to dislike a toucan, isn't it? They're so comical with their wonderful beaks and their funny gestures, and they can be a little bit opinionated. But the one we're going to do today, I just feel he's statuesque. He's got a gorgeous pose and that beak is shown off to perfection. So my paper for today is going to be hot pressed paper, and I've stretched it on a board the night before so that it won't buckle when I paint on it. In another video with the links in the text below, you'll see how to stretch watercolour paper if you don't know how to do that. So to make a start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what colours I'm going to use and you can write those down and check you've got them all ready in your palette. Here are the colours I'm going to use for this toucan. They're all Winsor & Newton professional artist grade tube paints. French ultramarine, permanent sap green, permanent magenta, Winsor orange, cerulean blue and burnt umber. If you haven't got the exact colours and if you haven't got Winsor & Newton, don't worry, just use the closest thing that you have on your palette, okay? Then brushes, I'm going to use 4 brushes. They're all synthetic brushes and the links to them are in the text below. I've got a 1/2 inch flat brush, a size 10 round watercolour brush, a size 5 watercolour round brush and the size 3 watercolour round brush. My palette, as usual, is a Frank Webb palette and it's got a lid on it to keep all the paints moist for weeks. And if you'll notice, there's no barrier between the well and the mixing area, so that means you can just swoosh in with your brush and drag some colour out. I recommend getting this palette, it's lasted me 25 years. Okay, so the paper, as I mentioned, is hot pressed and I stretched it on the board the night before. And you can see a video about how to stretch paper in the link below. So what I'm going to start with is wetting the actual bird. So I'm going to wet my brush by dunking my brush in the water pot. It's cold water. I recommend getting big pots of water, not little ones, because you need to keep your brushes nice and clean. So get rid of the air bubbles. Then have one of these toweling flannels or face cloths to hand. Dry the shaft because you don't want droplets of water running down and coming off and going sploosh on your bird just where you don't want it. So I'm now going to wet the whole bird with this clear water. And I'm doing this so that when I put the colour on, we get soft edges to start with. Watercolour tends to go from loose and soft to hard and more detailed. That's the general progression is not a law. You can do what you like in art, but I'm just showing you this general procedure, which is one that, you know, is used by many artists and has been for years. The paper is hot pressed and it's 90 pounds in weight. In America you'd say 200 GSM. I stretch it because if I was to paint this toucan on it without stretching it, it would start to buckle and cockle, and the stretching process overnight helps to reduce that buckling from happening. You can't buy ready stretched watercolour paper in loose sheet form. The only thing you can buy are watercolour boards, which are very expensive, or you can buy watercolour blocks, which are less expensive. The blocks are not as good as the boards in that they still buckle a little bit. So I'd recommend that you just get used to stretching your watercolour paper, because it's the best surface on which to paint. So I'm using the tip. This is a lovely brush. It's quite plump, but it comes to a nice fine tip, so I can get right in the edge of the toucan's tail feathers and just paint to the edge of my pencil drawing to wet the whole area. I'm going to leave his feet out for now. Okay, so he's all wet. And this is key with watercolour. You need to be aware of what's happening with the moisture on the watercolour. So if I can tilt it now and show you what's happening, I might need to zoom out a little bit more. Can you see the shine on the bird there, on the paper? Right? That's wet. But also you'll notice that it's puddling a little bit on the rim of the beak. So that's a little bit too wet there. So to share that water out, I'm just going to tip my bird and let the water gently drain down. Can you see that moisture? Drain down into the tail. Now the tail, as you can see, is not shining, and that's dried already. So I'm going to need to re-wet the tail. Everything else is still nice and moist. So basically, as watercolourists, if you're doing wet into wet, which is what we're going to do in a minute, you need to be able to make sure you've got a nice shine, but not puddles of water, all over the surface that you're going to paint into. If it's damp and there's no shine on the paper and we put colour on, we'll probably end up with back runs, also known as cabbages and cauliflowers. So let's show you again. Can you see the shine on the paper now? There. Need to lift it up a bit. You can see that the bird's a different colour. It's almost like a sort of a grey, isn't it? Well, that shows me that there's moisture, enough moisture all over the bird for us to now start dropping in some colour. So we'll start with the palest colour. Oh, I forgot to mention, sorry, on the colours list was Windsor Yellow. Sorry about that. So Windsor Yellow is a lovely mid sort of yellow colour. I'm going to mix that with a few drops of water that are on the palette. My brush was already moist. As you can see, it's not dripping off my brush. That's about the consistency. So thin cream, I'd say. So let's drop. I'll keep my other toucan here so that you've got the two on the screen and you can picture it as it's coming along. Drop the yellow in there, because with watercolour we start with the palest colours first. And don't worry if it goes over what will soon become black feathers, because the black will be darker than the yellow, and that's that problem solved. the black will hide the yellow fringing. So I've put some yellow on there. Now the next lightest colour is, I'd say this orange here. So I'm going to go for a smaller brush now. I think I'll go for the size 3 brush because I only want a little bit of Winsor orange. I don't want it too runny. About that sort of mix. About that. Let me put a bit of the orange there. Now this might flare a little bit because the paper is moist, but it won't flare a lot. Because the paper wasn't running with water. Just making that shape. Zoom in here. Let's focus on the beak for now. Now as I'm painting the beak, I'm aware that the body is starting to dry out, so we'll probably have to wet that again, but for now we'll just concentrate on the beak. This is a good exercise for you to see just how long the paper stays wet, or doesn't, as the case may be. Now the beak has gone a little bit dry in places, so I'm just going to re-moisten it while I've got a chance, because I want the green to be able to flow on into moist paper, and it's just dried out too quickly. So very delicately putting some more water in. That orange shape is holding quite well, isn't it? So let's have some sap green now. The sap green, and again I give it a little blend on the palette. I don't go straight from the well, you know, to the painting. I always give it a little mix on the palette. So a little bit sap green, and by having these little droplets on the palette you can drag those in instead of putting your brush in the pot and losing all of your colour. So let's get our green on. And again, it's given us a soft-edged application. And the green goes right around there. This is where using a small brush will help you have a little bit more control. And again, don't worry if the green blurs into some of the other areas, because I'll show you how you can wipe that off now. If you make a thirsty brush, so what you need to do is get a brush, any brush, preferably a flat because they work well. Moisten the flat brush very well. Make sure all the air bubbles have come out of the hairs there. We want it to be very super absorbent. So bring the brush out and dry the shaft and all of the hair. Drag it through like that. So this now is very absorbent, and if that green, say, had flared too far into the beak end, which it has a little bit, you can just touch that in very quickly, you see, and it sucks up the green colour, just takes it down. And then you rinse your brush again and you dry it again like that, and then you keep lifting. So I want to now get my magenta colour and my blue colour into the beak. That's what's left to do. So let's get some cerulean blue. It's just a small piece of cerulean blue. Now the green has soaked in there, hasn't it? So I'll just press that thirsty brush in, you see? Rinse my brush. Drag that clean brush there, so it's brought me the white of the paper back there, and I can drop in my cerulean blue. Again, the same mixture as all the others, sort of thin cream It's quite hard to describe texture and dilution, isn't it? Because everyone's got a different idea of what creamy is and what milky is. That's why watercolour is quite difficult, because you have to learn to judge the wetness yourself. So the last bit now is some permanent magenta for the tip of the beak. Permanent magenta is quite active, isn't it? It flares a lot more than all of the others so far. It seems to be flaring a lot more. But we don't mind the odd bit of flaring. It's a painting after all, it's not a photograph. We want a little bit of artistry happening there. So we've got the basic colours on, and they're all flat colours at the moment. There's no tone and no shading. So what we're going to do is add a little bit of shading onto the green. So we pick up some sap green, and opposite green on the colour wheel is magenta. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of magenta and just darken that green off. And while the green is still a bit moist, we put a bit of a shadow under there. And it's bleeding into the first green. And let's have a bit of a shadow on the blue as well, cerulean blue. And opposite cerulean blue is cadmium scarlet. Again, sorry, I didn't mention cadmium scarlet. So if we mix cerulean blue with cadmium scarlet, we get a sort of dulled blue, because they're complementary. And we put that in the blue there, bit of a shadow there. And you can drag it into the green slightly. And then opposite magenta, as we know, is green, because we just used the green in the magenta, didn't we? So we'll get some magenta and a tiny bit of sap green to go into that, and that'll darken the magenta a little bit, very small amounts. We don't want blobs, just small amounts. And then we can put that in there. And don't worry if it bleeds into the blue a little bit. Maybe a little bit on the top part of that beak, just for contrast. Right, the last thing I want to do on this beak before we move on is, again, with this thirsty brush. So this is the brush that we wet and then we dried. And I'm going to lift out a highlight on the green part of the beak to indicate some sunlight striking there. So I'm going to drag it like that down into the magenta part of the beak. And you need to rinse and do this quite often. Might need to do it about 5 times. Rinse my brush, wipe my brush, keep it in the shape that it's meant to be, you know, sort of sharp, alright? And then keep pressing it in, and then dragging, and it will splay a little bit, and then you've got a bit of a highlight coming. I'm just going to drag it, I'm just going to move my board a little bit to show you. So I'm doing this action, okay? Like that. So we're getting a nice soft shine on the beak. Keep going. Might need to do it 7 times, whatever. Because we're just trying to get back to the white of the paper to give our toucan a nice shiny beak. Okay, so that's how he's looking at the moment, and we're going to stop there and let everything dry. See you in the next clip.